This is Tehachapi. Sit back and relax as Key, Corey, Greg, and Ashley talk about what's happening in and around Tehachapi.
It's Tehachapi time. Key Budge, Corey Costello today. Our guest, Corey, is Nick Cullen, the Director of Animal Services for the County of Kern. Nick, welcome to Tehachapi.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. We had a recent show where we were talking about code enforcement, and we had Tony Bonelli from the police department in, and then someone asked a question regarding animal codes in the city and surrounding areas. And then I reached out to Nick, and you right away said, yeah, let's do it. Let's talk Tehachapi. Let's talk animal services, what the county does. And so thank you for making the trek up from Bakersfield.
Of course, any opportunity I get to drive up to Tehachapi, I'll jump on it. The weather is so nice up here, and the community is always welcoming.
Well, let's talk about animal services here in the county of Kern. You are our contracted animal control, animal services provider here for the city, but also for the unincorporated areas. So you've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm sure that keeps your staff pretty busy.
Certainly does. I think Kern County is about 8,200 square miles. We have 11 animal control officers to enforce the laws in all of those, most of those 8,200 square miles. So it's a little complex sometimes to get out to the outlying areas in an adequate amount of time, but we certainly do our best.
That's got to be a challenge. I didn't realize that you were limited to that many animal control officers, because that's a big task. There's a lot of areas that have strays and other issues, that take place that require your attention. So there's no downtime.
Not much. And consider for a second, our officers are more or less available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those 11 officers, they're on duty 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Sunday. And then prior to 8 a.m. and after 5 p.m., they're on availability status. And our calls come through the Kern County Sheriff's Department. So round the clock, 24/7, 365 days a year, animal control officers are available for when animals are in distress.
I'm curious you talked about the, having a large area to cover and not a lot of officers. It's a limited amount of officers to do that. Do you find yourself kind of concentrated in more areas, maybe where there's more farming and the animals can be more destructive that maybe are running loose and that sort of thing? Or certain communities where is there attention really in more communities than, let's say, Tehachapi, for example, because I don't see it. You'll have dogs running around once in a while, but I know other places, there's a lot of them that are out.
Yeah, we're blessed with the folks that live in Tehachapi. I took a look at this morning, and I think the first 6 months of the year we've responded to about 145 calls for service in Tehachapi, which is not very much in 6 months, although it is about 35% more than last year's first 6 months of the year. But that's really more in line with what we're seeing throughout the entire county. The county is a vast area, and our officers respond to every single call that we get for service. It may not sometimes be in person. Sometimes it may be a phone call to handle that. It might even just be a letter that gets sent out. But every call that comes through our department gets responded to. We receive about 15,000 calls for service a year. Our officers spend most of their time responding to the areas that we receive the most calls from, which tends to be the more densely populated, East Bakersfield, definitely the northern Bakersfield area, the Oildale area, and they've recently been getting an increase in call volume in our outlying areas as well. So, Roseman, North Edwards, Boron, Mojave, Lake of the Kern River Valley, they're all over the place, and it's a tough go of it right now just because the call volumes are increasing as there are more animals in our community.
So it's probably more. So it sounds like these people have their day as full a lot of the time, just calls. Because I remember I remember there was a time when you would see patrolling. The animal control would be out. And then it's like, oh my gosh, where's hope my dog's not out, right? and that they'd pick things. But it seems like now a lot of this is just responding based on the massive amount of calls that your organization is receiving.
Yeah, our officers are complaint based for the most part. They spend most of the day responding to complaints that we've received through dispatch. There are certain areas that allow us to canvass and patrol more often. Tehachapi is one of those areas. Some of the areas that are still populated, but have less of a problem with loose animals, are those areas where they're able to patrol more often. If I have an officer that's assigned to the Kern River Valley or one that's assigned to Tehachapi Mojave, they'll have more time to patrol areas. But officers that are assigned to metropolitan areas like Bakersfield, they're just responding to the calls that come. They do not have the time to patrol those areas like we wish they could.
Sure.
What are some of the typical calls for service that your team is responding to?
Yeah, so they vary pretty wildly. The most common call that we get is that somebody found an animal, a dog most of the time, and that they've confined it on their property and that they're asking us to come and pick it up, which we do as a courtesy most of the time. Probably secondary to that is I've seen some animals running loose in my neighborhood this morning. And then probably tertiary would be responses for law enforcement assist, aggressive animals, bites that have happened. And then somewhere down the list, fortunately, is injured, ill, anybody that's neglecting or abusing their animals. That's kind of the spectrum. And there's a few other calls included in there. It's not entirely dogs and cats that we respond to. Our officers handle livestock as well. So it's definitely a full day. I was an officer for the first 7 years of my employment with the county, from 2005 until 2012, and there is never a dull day. You always see something that first makes you scratch your head, but then you realize you've never seen anything like that before.
Did you ever get any of those, like there's a snake loose in the wall call and then you need to come get it or something like that?
I have. I've gotten snakes in my walls. I've gotten...
Burn the house down at that point. Just torch the entire thing.
And we don't typically deal with reptiles or wildlife in any capacity, but especially when the time allows, as a courtesy, we'll respond. And I have responded to my share of reptile snake calls, especially in the desert. Our officers carry snake tongs just in case.
Oh, gotcha.
It's not a requirement that they respond to those calls, but just in case.
Better to have them than not.
Absolutely. I'd rather have a pair of snake tongs to keep the fangs as far away from me as I possibly could.
There you go.
Exactly that. Being a volunteer snake guy,
right,
as a part of the snake guy team up here, I've got my tongs always available and a free bucket along with a hook.
Those
pick
are
them up.
two
This guy's
very
unreal though,
important tools.
because he'll like post videos of him getting a rattlesnake and he's wearing like shorts and tennis shoes. I'm like, I'd be behind like one of those military shields trying to get this thing. This guy's out just another day,
Distance would be your tool.
Right. Unreal.
The tongs are 42 inches long.
Yeah.
And if you're using them correctly,
Sure,
and you're using that support hook with the weight, they're never closer than 3 feet.
Golly.
And
He's making a good argument.
No, he's not. I'm not going. He's not going to convince me that I'm going to do this ever.
well, for me, it's a call for service. I think back to my days, LA County Sheriff, and we would get those when animal control couldn't make it, and we'd get that rattlesnake in a yard, in a house, whatever, and we'd have to go handle it. And people they freak out.
Yep.
And you're there to try and calm them and give them a sense of that bringing back the normalcy to their life, and you're just there to kind of help them along to get there. So, I mean, that's exactly what you do when you've got a dog that's running in the neighborhood and people are scared. There's some people that are just terrified of dogs.
Absolutely.
And
a lot of times the job of an animal control officer, probably much like law enforcement, is community policing and just being a presence, representing that there's some help along the way. And that's a lot of times our officers are doing that. They may not be taking an animal or picking up an animal. They may be handling neighbor disputes. They may be having conversations with people about how to be more responsible, making some recommendations on how to keep your property secure, maybe responding to snake calls occasionally. A lot of times we try to get out there and just help where we can. Might not necessarily be something in our normal scope of duty, but if we can help out, we certainly can. So
aside from just the animal control officer part, you have a lot of other things sort of under your purview. Let's talk shelters for a little bit. I know you'd made a comment to us before we started that, your shelters this is a nationwide issue, but especially in Kern County, they're pretty much full all the time. And you're seeing an influx of more animals than you probably have in the past. What's the kind of status of the shelters and what's sort of leading to all of a sudden, more animals being either picked up or surrendered at shelters?
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, and I say fortunately because it's sometimes nice to not be alone in the boat, but unfortunately it's a problem that, is nationwide right now, is that there's just more animals entering shelters and less animals making it out of the shelters alive than in any time in recent memory. For the county, our department, Animal Services, from the years of 2013 through 2019, each year over year, we would see less and less animals, specifically dogs, coming into the county shelters, and more animals making it out of those shelters alive. And something may have happened in early 2020 that turned that on its ear.
Did people get too many animals during COVID? They thought, I'm at home, I'm going to need another dog, and then they realized that I can't handle this dog, and they gave it up? Is that kind of one of the things?
People went back to work.
That is the $1 million question that a lot of people that are much smarter than me are trying to figure out is why are there more animals showing up at animal shelters now than in 8 years?
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of most things. I think I kind of liken the intake of animals at an animal shelter no different than something like teen pregnancy, literacy rates, high school dropout, drug addiction, domestic violence. They're societal problems. The way we care for our animals is a societal problem, and there's an ebb and a flow to it. And when we see problems that people are being challenged with in the community, like homelessness and struggling to pay bills and the economy, and things are costing more money, we start to see a rise in the amount of animals that are coming to the shelters. So I think the economy and the struggle that people in the community are facing right now to make ends meet and to purchase just regular resources to care for the animals, that's certainly one thing. But I think access to veterinary care right now is very tough to come by.
It's a major issue in Tehachapi. I will tell you that much. We are every veterinary clinic, hospital, we may call it, they are full. And I ran into it recently when I had to put a dog down and I was turned away, basically turned away with an emergency situation. And eventually they said, okay, because I didn't know choice at the time except to take her home and let her bleed to death. That was going to happen. And they finally said, okay, let's take a look.
Yeah, the situation is pretty dire when a veterinarian is telling you, I can't help you.
Yeah.
But, again, for good or for bad, we're not in this boat alone. What Tehachapi faces as far as veterinary care is no different than really a lot of areas in the county, that it's a long wait to get veterinary care. There's less veterinarians nationwide. There's a shortage. There's some predictions that say by 2030 there's going to be like a 15,000 veterinarian shortage to meet the demand, because as more people get animals and the demand increases, the amount of licensed veterinarians is not keeping up. So I certainly think access to veterinary care here locally is a problem that's contributing to the high intake at animal shelters. It's just like the economy, just like recovery from the pandemic. I do think that there is some opportunistic folks who may have seized on the opportunity during the pandemic when people had an interest in getting animals. Some of those opportunistic people started breeding animals to fill in that vacuum. So I think all of those things are contributing to the increase in shelter intake in Kern County and really in other areas all across the nation.
Yeah, and I can't encourage people enough to. I've had 2 shelter dogs. They're the greatest dogs in the world because they almost have like this. I always feel like they have. I would tell my wife, like, the dog's got PTSD. Doesn't want to go back into a cage, and is going to live its best life, and they enjoy, and it seems like they appreciate their freedom more.
I second that. I've had 4 rescue dogs, and it's that sense of when they seem to just say thank you, and you can tell that they kind of bond with you, and they just appreciate the fact that they've got their people. Their person has come for them, and we've experienced that same thing where all of a sudden you feel like that emotional connection. They make it pretty quick. They go, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
You could see it in their eyes.
Yeah. Now let's talk about pet owner responsibility. We kind of touched on that a little bit. You mentioned it. Summertime is here. Obviously Tehachapi is about 10, 15 degrees cooler than our surrounding neighbors just below in elevation. But let's make sure we talk about being a responsible pet owner. Let's kind of focus on just dogs, because that seems to be the most common pet I think that people probably don't take care of as well as maybe they could have, or don't realize that they're not, taken care of. So what are some of the things that we need to make sure we think about as a pet owner?
I think there's always there's a difference between what's required and what's socially acceptable. I have three shelter pets, 2 dogs and a cat. And one of the dogs sleeps in my bed every night. I wish she didn't, but she does. And the other one sleeps right next to the bed, and our cat is well cared for. And that's how I care for my pet. And I think a lot of folks care for their pet and treat them like family members. The law doesn't require that. The law requires somewhat less than that, but we hope and pray that people understand what responsible pet ownership is. There are legal requirements. You have to license your pet. You have to obtain a rabies vaccination for your animal. And then there are animal care requirements on how you need to provide minimum levels of care for your animals. They have to get access to nutrition and stay hydrated, not be left out in the elements for long periods of time unless they're acclimated to do so. We hope and we pray that people understand that our pets are family and they should be treated like family. We understand that not everybody has the same level. Their animals don't serve the same role in their households that they might serve in my household. However, there are minimum levels of care, and that's what our officers are out there to enforce most of the time. And a lot of those things have to do with being a responsible pet owner, making sure that when the temperature can do damage to your animal, that the animal has the ability to get out of the elements, that it has fresh, cool water, that it has an adequate amount of space, that it's not tied to a tree on a chain all day long, and there are laws that make that illegal. But we always want to make sure that we encourage the community to. The laws are the laws, and we want you to comply with them. But we also want to encourage the community to treat your pets like family, and have them serve a role in your family that makes it such that they're cared for, that they're provided everything they need to be happy and healthy.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, because you've got, I think some of that goes back to the shelter piece too. You kind of have these social economic differences, and sometimes with pet care, a lot of people, and I would even say even in Tehachapi, have that family aspect, right? I mean, we have one of our businesses that was just small business of the year was Canine Creek, and they specialize in selling expensive high-end dog food, and they do very well for themselves doing that, because they have a great customer base of people that pay extra, to get the right stuff, for their pets. But then I've been around families that the dogs were they were actually working dogs. They were working cattle dogs. They had a little bit of space in the house, but they didn't even buy dog food. They kind of ate scraps, and they were well fed, but they weren't getting a nutrition. But they were cared for. They had water, they had space, but they were kind of like working dogs, And I think there's a difference in some of that. And I think sometimes the ones that aren't cared for as family are the ones that sometimes get cast off and sent to shelters.
Yeah, and I think you just pointed out that animals serve different roles. It doesn't mean it's wrong. I have a friend who owns a ranch, and his dogs are working dogs. Mm-hmm. They have a job. Yeah. And the care that he provides his animals are radically different than the care that I provide mine. Yeah. But they're no less important to him than my dogs are to me. And any role that an animal serves is understandable,
Mm-hmm.
But there's always minimums of care that we have to make sure that we provide.
Sure.
One of the things that we struggle with all the time is that, at the county shelter, we take in about 12,000 dogs and cats a year. That number's rising. And the amount of folks that come to reclaim their animal are about 5 to 6%.
Wow.
And that's remained constant for about the past 10 years.
Wow.
Over the past 10 years, we've taken in about 130,000 dogs and cats, roughly, and about 5 to 6% of those dogs and cats actually went back to their owners. And we're always trying to wrap our brains around how much we love our animals, and how if my animal was missing, I would drop everything to find out where it was. And if it was in a shelter, I would do everything I could to get it out. And we're always trying to understand how animals play different roles and have different priorities in people's lives. And how do we convince them that your animal's not better off in the shelter, that it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to get your dog back, and that we need you to come and reclaim your animals. So we're always trying to understand how the community views their animals and how to really communicate to them the need to take care of their animals. And if they're lost, go looking for them. And if they're at the shelter, come and speak to us. We'll get them back to you.
I'm curious what the role of the sort of nonprofit is now. It seems like, and I've got some friends that are involved in some of these, and we have a few in Tehachapi that they'll pick up some of these stray cats, they'll take them to Bakersfield, they'll get them spayed and neutered, and then they'll bring them back, but just to try to help with that problem. And I know there's some organizations in Bakersfield do the same. I know there's also some shelter or rescue and foster organizations now that are trying to keep them from get as few as killed as possible,
Right.
and they're rescuing them. So what are the role of the nonprofits that seem to be springing up in this county and trying to help a little bit as much as they can?
It's a massive role. They're arm in arm with us in the trenches. You touched on earlier, Key, like how important it is to adopt a shelter pet and how sometimes they seem to appreciate you're saving them more than maybe an animal gotten through another means. The animals that are in our nonprofits, that are in our rescue organizations, the city of Tehachapi and some of the unincorporated areas of Tehachapi, there are some of the best nonprofits in this area in the entire county and really in the entire state. And those animals that they have in those facilities, a lot of them came from the shelters, either county or city or some other shelter, and they are just as much in need sometimes as the animals in our animal shelter. So if you're in the neighborhood to invite a new 4-legged family member into your home, just know that if you go to a nonprofit, if you go to an animal rescue, especially here locally in Tehachapi, you're still saving a life. Because what you're doing is you're taking an animal from that rescue and freeing up a space for them to potentially help another animal that's in an animal shelter right now. But the animal rescues, we work hand in hand, arm in arm. We see the same problems. We try to work together to come up with solutions for them. And I really can't think of too many areas that have more of a plethora of nonprofits that are really invested and really doing good work than here in Tehachapi.
Now, do we see the nonprofits where, and we talk just prior to dogs getting ready to be euthanized, where they step in and say, okay, we can foster, and then they remove it from your facility so that way they can give that animal an opportunity to find a family?
We certainly do see that. What we've been doing recently for about the past 6 or 8 months or so is we'll send out a list of animals. Hey, these animals have been here for 30 days, 6 weeks, 2 months. These animals are really at risk. And, we do get a good response from those lists that we send out. And there are folks that will come in from nonprofits and say, I want to take an animal off of your PTS list, your euthanasia list. And that's always a blessing. But, as much as that is a help, which is a huge help to save an animal that's otherwise scheduled for euthanasia, but it's also a help when a nonprofit comes in and takes any animal, because what that means is that's freeing up the space in the kennel for another animal to stay longer, or for us to move another animal into that space to keep that one longer, invest more resources in it. Every animal that a nonprofit saves from our shelter, really any shelter, is life-saving, no matter if it's been here 2 months or 7 days, because it frees up space, and space is really at a premium right now.
And one of the programs that you have is 30-day dogs. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we this is probably 3 or 4 years ago, we had determined that we wanted to implement sort of a sliding scale of adoption fees. Our normal adoption fee is $85. That includes spay, neuter, vaccinations, a microchip, a license for a year, everything you need to be a responsible pet owner, really. We haven't charged full boat $85 for probably 6 years. But we realize that it's sometimes not fair for an animal that's been here for 30 days that their adoption fee is the same as an animal that's highly adoptable that's been here for 4 days and has somebody waiting at the door the day it's available. There is, most folks that come into an animal shelter, a lot of them don't know necessarily what they're looking for. But if you walk through our facility, some dogs are highly adoptable. They're smaller, they're puppies, they just have a look about them. And then there's animals that we know we always struggle to find placement for. They're the larger breed dogs. They're the bully breeds. They are the shepherds. They are the huskies. maybe the animals that don't show well in a kennel. What we mean by that is maybe they're anxious, they have some anxiety, and they give off a sense that they're not friendly. And so we know that those animals that have been here longer, that are maybe not showing so well, they need the most help. So we had created that sliding scale so that if there's an animal that's been here for 30 days, it is a free adoption. There is no cost to adopt that animal. And it's really because you're saving that animal's life and you're freeing up kennel space for us to keep another animal for longer. So that's every animal that's been in our facility for over 30 days is a fee-waived adoption, and it's for that reason.
I hadn't heard of that program before. I was really impressed when I was looking at your website that was one of the programs that is offered year-round. Mm-hmm. And I would think that, for me, that opens my ears to being, I like the fact that this was a tough fit for some families, mm-hmm. but if you have that special kind of a feel or connection with animals, give that an opportunity.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure if we're going to place an animal up for adoption, or if we're going to hold an animal for 30, 60, 90 days, it's because that animal is exceptionally well behaved. If you're coming into a facility, either our shelter or another, and you're looking to save an animal and you want a long stay animal, it's not, that dog hasn't necessarily been in a shelter for 30 days because it's highly aggressive. We've held on to it because it is adapted. It is well adjusted and well behaved, and it's a good shelter. It's a good pet, and we've kept it that long for that reason. So when you're looking at animals that have been there for a long time, they've been there for a long time because our staff knows this is an animal that deserves a home, and it will do well in a home. So there's no concern, if you're going to an animal shelter, our animal shelter, and you're considering adopting an animal that's been there a long time, you're getting a well-adjusted dog. They've been there for a while. They're veterans. They're coming out of that shelter, and they'll certainly have an appreciation for life outside the shelter.
Well, let's shift over to cats. And one thing that I've taken advantage of is barn cats. Mm-hmm. I moved from a regular house property to one with a kind of a little ranchette, a little bit bigger property, and people were saying, take advantage of the barn cats because the barn cats will thank you by saving them. And I go, why do I want a feral cat at my house? But these are some, and that's another one where you go from a feral cat where, they want nothing to do with you. And then you provide them with a place, a protection, you give them the food, the water. And all of a sudden my feral barn cats, they come up, they don't want me to pick them up, but they will run across my legs and do all those things that cats do and start to purr and say thank you. It's like I'm ready for my dry food. I'll go out and do my mouse hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the barn cat program or the feral cat program that you have.
Yeah, that was I may have gotten some criticism from some folks in local government because nobody really could understand what a barn cat program was. But what it is it's nature's pest control. Cats are predators, and you take the predation tendency for predation in the cat, and you combine it with some ranches, farms, industrial facilities that have rodent problems. And when you combine the problem with the predation, it's a good solution. A lot of folks are concerned about maybe some of the chemicals that come along with pest control, or some of the potentially inhumane methods that are involved in pest control, especially with rodents. And there's cats that come to us through a number of different ways. Sometimes we may get cats that were retrieved from Hart Park. There's a whole community of cats that are out at Hart Park, and if they're not well adjusted, we may put them in our barn cat program. Sometimes people bring us a cat that they caught on their property, and for some reason or another, it's not a candidate to be spayed or neutered and released. And we'll keep those animals and we put them in our barn cat program, and we offer them for free. The only thing that we require you to do is to provide food and water and a place for them to get out of the elements. I think you've had the experience too. That I can't promise you that they'll come around and start rubbing against your legs. But every barn cat that we've sent out, we've gotten feedback that they're doing their job, and they call them working cats.
They are.
That's the reason why they call them that.
Yeah. The other morning, I'm heading to work, and we have three 3 barn cats, and one that's adopted our front part of our property. They're all females. They've kind of each adopted different areas. And the one that usually has our front porch, she's waiting for me as I'm ready to leave the work. She's got a gopher in her mouth. And, I feed her every day on my way to work, but she's like, hey, look what I'm
Doing my
earning my
job.
keep,
Got you,
doing my
boss.
job, doing
Yeah.
my job.
I got you.
And it was like I step outside and it drops it there at my feet, and then it starts to squirm away, and she goes over and grabs it, and it's like I go fill up the cat bowl with some dry food, and she was super happy. I'm happy, but and that one. The funny thing is when we picked it up and we had them in each, we kept them for about 2 weeks inside a dog carrier, large dog carrier, kept food and water, and let them know that
This is their home, or
right.
this is, yeah.
And this one stayed under the blanket the entire time. We never saw it. It was such a, I'm feral and I want nothing to do with you. You terrify me. And I let it out after a couple of weeks, finally get it, and I didn't see it for 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, it took off. The other ones adopted well. Well, after 2 weeks, it had come out of the bushes where it had been just kind of laying low, and then realized it was okay. And now we've had that cat for 7 years, and it's been a part of your program. It's like one of those success stories where we look back 7 years ago. There was no way I thought a barn cat would have hung out for that long, but it's just continued to do that hunting and paying off for me. I'm like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, we got a couple in our neighborhood, and I think they were, when I moved in, the neighbor across the street said, yeah, this is kind of a neighborhood sort of alley cat, basically. But he said there's a home because it's fed, and he said, but there's 2 of them, and they're great hunters, and they're still around. Matter of fact, it's kind of gopher season now, and I was finishing my run the other morning, and I look, and it's sitting on the corner of my street, and there's a fresh gopher hole, and the cat's just sitting there staring at it,
waiting.
and I just said, good cat, and we don't have any issues with mice or even my property. The other day, I was leaving and with my sons, and the cat was sitting on one of our hillsides looking at a hole, and I said, hey, boys, check it out. This cat's going to get a gopher. They were awesome, and someone takes care of them. They do get some food, but they do a lot of work, and it's a huge blessing to have that, because we don't have those issues with field mice and that sort of thing in our neighborhood. So
You saw he was on duty.
Oh yeah,
He was on
yeah.
duty.
No, and they're fairly nice. They're a little domesticated because they will kind of come up to you, but you see them creeping in the bushes and on the hunt, and it's pretty cool to watch. It's very useful to have around. That's for sure.
That is cool.
Yeah, and let me. One thing I learned is that when a feral cat, when you've taken it in, you've neutered it, you do something to it to signal that this has been a cat that's been addressed as far as spay and neuter.
Yeah, the sort of universal notice that an animal has already been surgically sterilized is that their ears are notched. It's usually their left ear. And if you see a cat roaming your neighborhood and it's got a notch in its ear, that's because it's already been trapped. It's already been spayed or neutered, and it's doing its job, and it's on duty. And there are a lot of folks in Kern County. There are some folks here right in Tehachapi that are what we call colony caretakers. They care for a colony of feral cats, and they're probably single most important thing they can do is make sure that they spay and neuter those animals so that they're not procreating and having offspring. So you hope that when you see those communities that you see a lot of ear tips and ear notches, and that's the way that you know that, okay, that animal's been fixed already.
Yeah, I learned that as a part of the barn cat program, and asking and learning that. I go, okay, that makes sense. You don't go out and just catch everyone and you bring them in and have the vet take a look. No, this one's already been. It's like, no, release that one. That one's good to go. So I've learned a lot about that through this program, which I fully support. Some people don't get it, and I've talked to a few of those people, and I go, no, you're giving this cat a chance at life, by adopting it and saying this is your home, this is your safe space, and the cats they're very territorial, and they will claim your place as its and reward you.
Yeah. No, I think those cats I talked about have like a block that because they kind of use an alley, and they have like a whole block that's theirs, and it's awesome. They do. There's 2 of them. They do a phenomenal job. So it's really cool.
Well, let's talk about some of the animals. One of the questions that we had when we had our code enforcement was types of animals. Corey, you looked into our municipal codes, types of animals that we can have within the city, and then Nick, I want to talk to you about the county. So, Corey, we here in the city limits of Tehachapi, we've got certain ordinances about the types of animals that we can have.
Yeah, so several years ago, as the city transitioned, many years ago actually, to more of a residential and not rural. We were more sort of suburban and not rural in terms of, so things like chickens and poultry and certain like livestock and things that went away. That's no longer something you can keep in your backyard. It's just more of a health safety thing at this time, especially as you're in a single family neighborhoods and noise and that sort of stuff. So those went away. So we don't allow the farm animals, so to speak. Pretty much everything that's not a cat or a dog, your reptiles and your tanks, that's different. But we're talking about that sort of stuff are not allowed. It's more of a cat, dog, regular sort of neighborhood when it comes to our municipal code and as far as animals. So, but it's funny just going through and researching that. I found like we've still got ordinances on the books about your horses and your buggies not blocking the sidewalk. So we might actually need to address some of those. Every once in a while you dig into that thing and like, oh yeah, we have some old ones that are still in there. So if you have a horse, don't let it block the sidewalk. Apparently, but
don't forget a couple years ago we did have a horse-drawn carriage come right down to Tehachapi Boulevard.
We did, yeah, yeah. No, you can still come through the area in a horse. I actually joked around with when gas got crazy expensive last year. I said, I told my neighbor, I said, I'm going to ride your horse to work because save me a few dollars. And I told Public Works they should put a couple hitching rails up, just around town. But then they're like, well, who's going to clean up the mess? And I was like, great point. Yeah. So we didn't do that. But yeah, you can ride through, just can't keep them in the neighborhood.
Well, I know some of our wineries have some tie down rails out there. So
sure.
People go out there to go wine tasting. They'll ride their horse out, tie down, and grab a glass of wine and then hit the trail again.
Mm-hmm. I bet you money that horse get you back home too. No matter how many glasses of wine you had, that horse will get you back home. They are wonderful animals.
Well, Nick, so let's talk about here in the county, the unincorporated areas that surround us. It's different. Kern County is very much an agricultural, farming, ranching type setting. So, but there are still some rules that are in place for properties outside of the city limits.
Yeah. Outside of the normal animal care requirements, the humane care that's expected and required, the county has some codes and ordinances that restrict how many dogs you can have on your property. And I know that the city of Bakersfield has a similar ordinance that if you have less than a quarter of an acre, it's 3 dogs is the limit. And in over a quarter of an acre, there is no dog limit. There is no limit to how many cats one can have, so you should be fine, Key, if you want to take on another 6 or 7 barn cats. We're talking about hooved animals. The county, that's also code enforcement with Kern County. That's not necessarily a Title VII ordinance that Animal Services would enforce, although we do. It's 4 hooved animals per quarter of an acre, and then once you exceed a quarter of an acre, then you're just dealing with animal care requirements at that point. And then there's some laws that get into exotic animals that we don't really enforce. But, dogs, there is a limit. Cats doesn't really come into play. And then livestock are really, the restrictions are for properties under a quarter of an acre.
And how closely do you end up working with Department of Fish and Wildlife? Or is there, I know there's people probably call Animal Services and it's a Fish and Wildlife handle. And then you probably have to refer them off. Or do you guys ever work hand in hand?
So we do get, I don't have the numbers in front of me. We do get a pretty significant amount of calls every year on wildlife, coyotes mostly, but all kinds of animals. And we do have a hotline that we call into Fish and Game to forward some complaints or some concerns over to them. I do know that we had an issue that I'll talk about. It was probably about a year ago, where there was an individual who was living in the eastern Bakersfield area, and he raised a coyote, and he had it in his residential backyard, and he raised it from a pup. I guess his neighbors either did not know about it or maybe they did, but something happened, and that dog ended up biting a child. Not a severe injury, but bit a child. And we had to work hand in hand with the state to come in and seize that animal. I believe they quarantined it and then relocated it. But we do work with the state agencies quite often. We do get a lot of calls from the community about wildlife and animals that are kind of out of our purview.
So is that the key word, wildlife? Is that what changes whether or not you're involved, or it goes to fish and wildlife, where it's a wild animal being, it's the coyote, it's the mountain lion, the bobcat, those types of critters that are a part of our area that we live in, but they're not a domesticated animal?
Yeah, we mainly have jurisdiction over domesticated animals, but like we said earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't carry snake tongs just in case,
right?
And that we don't respond to calls for wildlife, especially if the state is not close by. I know when I responded to a call when I was in uniform, when I was an officer, for an injured coyote, that the state was a couple hours out, and I had to go and impound a coyote that was not friendly, as they often are not. So I mean, there's some bleed over sometimes between the state and the county as far as wildlife and domesticated animals, but by and large, our officers are enforcing laws and supporting domesticated animals.
Yeah. And see, we have that crossover here. On the way to work yesterday, I saw a coyote, and it wasn't in a crazy, it was a semi-urban area, and I'm like, is that a coyote? You can just tell by the way they run and their size, and they're kind of like a scrawny dog, especially around here. They're not large. And sure enough, as I kind of passed that street, looked down, it was kind of near the railroad tracks, and I was like, yep, that was a coyote. We have that crossover here.
They do come into the city.
Yeah.
They do. And I will state it's a state code. It is not a local code, and we do not enforce it, but it is not legal to own a coyote as a pet. Let's just make sure that's understood.
Well, joining us, just stepping in, is Jason Dunham from our Tehachapi Police Department. Jason wanted to talk to you, Nick, so I'll let you guys do that off air. But Jason, I'm going to ask you to pull the microphone up to you, and I want to ask you a couple of questions, because I know that what we do at the Tehachapi Police Department and with Animal Services, Nick, with your teams work together. So, Jason, sometimes you guys will help out and you will deal with calls, and there's some crossover.
Yeah, so oftentimes what we get in the wee hours of the morning are the dog barking calls. Those can even be during the day, but we get those in the evening, and it's a quality of life issue. We understand it, but dogs, that by nature, they bark, they alert. That's what they're supposed to do. When it becomes chronic, then we kind of cross over with animal control here. So we like to get voluntary compliance from the owners of the dogs, and then if we can't get it that way, it can turn into a citation. Then ultimately, the agency that can remove the dog is animal control.
Yeah, and a lot of times with nuisance noise complaints, our officers are determining whether it is a nuisance. And the definition of nuisance might be different for each person, but our officers usually use the idea that if an animal is unprompted, barking or otherwise crowing or making some noise for over 20 minutes, that could be considered a nuisance. And when we say unprompted, we mean, an animal or that's vocalizing, a dog that's barking, let's say, because somebody knocked on your door or your neighbor's door, or because somebody pulled up to the residence because the dog's barking. That's not what we would consider a nuisance. If an animal, a dog is vocalizing every time the wind blows, and it's for 30 minutes at a time, maybe it's early in the morning, then we're going to get into an area where we might have to issue a notice or a citation of some kind. But most often than not, our officers are pulling up to a residence where a nuisance noise complaint was submitted, and they're parking inconspicuously, I hope, rolling the windows down, shutting the truck off, and they're listening. And they're trying to determine whether or not there's a nuisance that's occurring. And if it is, then there's some contact with the pet owner. And like you said, we try to gain compliance willfully before we have to get into an area where we're issuing notices or citations.
Correct. We don't want to see anybody lose their pets. There are, I've got some neighbors where their dogs kind of just barked incessantly, and it seems like they've figured out, when it's appropriate to bark and when it's not. And oftentimes, I think in today's society, we don't go contact our neighbor anymore and say, hey, this is kind of bothering me. We just kind of defer to the police department or code enforcement or animal control. And if you think your neighbor's approachable, oftentimes that's the better way to get compliance than to involve the police. Because as soon as they see the police car show up, they go, oh my gosh, what's going on? So,
yeah, and it usually sets a precedent for the next time something like that happens. I think we always prefer when it can be handled between residents, between neighbors. I mean, not only does it promote, good neighbors,
right,
but it resolves the situation, 99.9% of the time when there's a conversation that can happen about how give and take can happen. I'll keep my dog indoors at these hours if it's bothering you, but I got to let him outside at this time.
Yeah,
we always rejoice when that happens.
Yeah, and it's we all understand in law enforcement how these things can be nuisances because all of us have worked during the night, and then when you're trying to sleep during the day and the dog's barking, it's tough. So we understand it. And sometimes it's a fine line, to deal with these issues. Well, you want to get compliance, you don't want to give a cite, you understand dogs bark, so sometimes it can be tough to deal with at our level.
Same.
So let's go into the strays, because I know when we have like a stray dog or someone will say, hey, this dog was walking down Curry, and they bring it into the PD.
Yeah, so we have a small area that we can house a dog until we can get it to animal control. And oftentimes what happens is on a holiday weekend or a long weekend or even a weekend, it becomes very complicated for us to house that animal, make sure it's fed, watered, and has an opportunity to use the bathroom or the restroom. That can become cumbersome for us because we don't have a facility for any length of storage for animals.
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying that of all of the incorporated municipalities that we deal with, like Tehachapi Police Department is the police department that I could think of that goes the extra mile to keep a dog for an extended amount of time sometimes until we can get there and pick it up. We always appreciate that about Tehachapi PD. They're a wonderful. You guys are a wonderful organization.
Thank you.
But yeah, certainly, our officers, especially if it's after hours, if it's before 8 a.m., after 5 p.m., weekends are a little bit touchy to get out to outlying areas. But our officers are most often after hours responding to emergency calls. So injured animal, aggressive law enforcement assist if there's an aggressive dog that's involving law enforcement. But for calls that doesn't require a response, like a friendly animal that's just confined, a lot of times our officers are going to respond the next day.
Right.
I think the complicated thing is what you touched on is if it's a holiday.
Yeah.
We try to do our best to try to get out there as soon as we can. It just depends on call volume, depends the time of day. But we're always appreciative when you guys can keep those animals for as long as you can. Give us time to get out there and pick them up.
Yeah, we try our best. I think almost everybody at the police department has an animal or a dog or whatever. So we have a big heart for animals, and we try to make sure we can, even if it's a Facebook post, try and reunite the animal with its owner. Dogs get out, they're curious, they want to go roam and find new friends and things to do. And I've seen in my career here, more people will call for dogs running at large than like somebody shooting a gun in Capitol Hills. I'm serious. They're like, oh, there's dogs running up Pinion. So, we get those calls quite often actually that we have to deal with.
Now, Jason, you guys, one of the nonprofits donated a chip reader, so you're able to scan, and if some of the dogs that get turned in, you're able to hopefully try to find that information.
Yes.
Nick, how important is that for pet owners to do that microchipping?
It's very important. It's really a life-saving step that you can take as a pet owner. We return somewhere upwards of 600 or 700 dogs back to their owners every year, and about 75% of them are returned because of a microchip. There's some weaknesses there with a microchip in that, You got to stay up to date on the information. If you change your address, change your phone number, it's difficult for us to get a hold of you. I always suggest that if you're going to microchip your pet, usually the microchip company allows you to put an alternate contact. Fill out that information, put as many alternate contacts as you can, every phone number that you can possibly think of, email address. If there's an opportunity for you to put a method of contact, use it. I can't tell you how many times it's disheartening when we receive an animal. A lot of the animals we receive from Tehachapi, we know they have an owner. We rarely get a true stray dog that's into Tehachapi. But there's not much more disheartening things when we come into a dog. It's got a microchip, so somebody cares about that animal. But for some reason, the information is outdated, and we can't get a hold of the owner. And then the animal's in our shelter, and it's there for a period of time, and we just hope and pray that somebody comes looking for it. And then we know that because, we're 45 miles away, not everybody's going to know if my dog got out last night. I got to drive to the county shelter to take a look for it. And that's why it's so important to microchip your pet, which, by the way, you can do at our vaccine clinic that's going to be at Meadowbrook Park this coming Saturday, June 10th, I believe, where you can get your pet license, your microchip if you'd like, some spay and neuter information there, and you can find out about any more resources that we offer. That's Saturday, June 10th at Meadowbrook Park from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. And like I said, you can get your microchip there.
And you do these events periodically, but you've just had another event this past weekend.
Yeah. Well, we as we talked about earlier, we're always trying to find new and creative methods to find homes for the animals that are coming into the animal shelter. So one of those methods is we just want to try to make sure we're meeting the community with some of these pets that need homes. We can't expect everybody to drive 45 miles into Bakersfield or 60 miles into Bakersfield to find an animal to adopt. So we try to bring them out here. We were out on Friday at Canine Creek. We talked about we were out on Friday at Tractor Supply with animals available for adoption. Mm-hmm. And then we'll be out this coming Friday at Canine Creek, which we talked about earlier, with some adoptable pets too. Just trying to get animals out into the community, place them up for adoption. We know that the people here in Tehachapi are super responsible. So, what better community to bring some of the animals that need a home to an area that's going to be super responsible with them. And we're going to be in Tehachapi quite a bit with adoptable pets throughout July. We'll be at Canine Creek again in July on July 7th. We'll be at P-Dubs and Mountain Bowling on July 15th. And then we'll be at Cohen's Bakery July 29th. So there's plenty of opportunity here in Tehachapi in the coming weeks and months to adopt a shelter pet.
And those pets will be ready to go home that day with someone for that right family.
That's correct. Microchipped, spayed and neutered, vaccinated, come with a license, and our adoption fee is only $20.
I've got a question, Key, if I can interject.
Okay.
So 4th of July,
Yeah.
this is an opportunity where we see a lot of dogs running at large. I know personally at home for us, we've brought our dogs in. We may put them in a room, get a fan going and some music. Is that something that the community should consider? Because once all this stuff starts going off, oftentimes we get a lot of calls for, hey, there's dogs everywhere, and they're running because they don't like the sound.
Yeah. So you tapped into something that's a serious issue, not just at animal shelters here locally, but in the entire country. 4th of July is one of those times of year when animal shelters just hate it. And it's because there's always a massive influx of animals that are coming into the shelters. And just like you pointed out, fireworks go off. And if your animal is prone to anxiety or not, they're gonna find a way out of your backyard when they think bombs are going off. They get frightened, they get scared. It's understandable that they'll try to escape. And that's when we see the most calls for loose animals. Is when we see the most the highest level of intake. Usually, and unfortunately nowadays, it's not just fireworks. The 4th of July is a couple of days before and a couple of days after.
Correct.
So usually, that's our most busy time of year for not only our officers responding to loose dog calls, but unfortunately injured animals. In our highest days of intake, the couple of days before and a couple of days after the 4th of July. So we always, and we will do so again this year, have a campaign to get the message out there to be responsible, prepare for the 4th. If you can keep your animal indoors, you got to do so. If it has to be outdoors, you got to make sure your property is secure.
And I would, and if you think it's secure, it probably isn't.
No.
Because I've seen, I mean, the best inside is the best bet, because I have seen dogs go through chain link, as in chew through it. It's insane when they get, amped up because of fireworks, what they'll do. And so you may think your fence is tall enough and it's stout enough. It probably is not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how many times I have had that conversation where somebody tells me, no, my property's secure, and then July 7th, he's in the front office of the shelter redeeming his pet. But yeah, I mean, there's some precautions that owners can take. Speak to your veterinarian. Your veterinarian is going to know if there's some medications that can be administered, if there's some devices. There are some actually articles of clothing that you can place on your animal to calm them and calm some of their anxiety. You got to know your dog, your pet. If they're prone to anxiety, you got to make sure that you try to keep them indoors, and like you said, Corey, even the most secure property, if the animal thinks that there's a war going on outside, you'd be surprised about how fractious they can get and how they can find a way out.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's me. I'm a cattle dog lover, so I've got 3 of them. And my male dog, if he's ready to get out of the backyard, this 6-foot fence, he'll go right over it. Yeah. And he will come to the front door, and he will try to open the knob like, I want in.
Hit the Ring camera button, trying to get your attention.
I'm serious. I'm serious, Corey. That's how he is. He's very like, I want out of here. So, and then like our Yorkie dog, seems like as times went on with 4th of July, he gets more he's more nervous than he ever was as the years go by.
Yeah, I don't think that's uncommon. I just know that even when you keep your pet indoors during the 4th, there's still some anxiety that your pets are going to feel. And, we even recommend, look, if you're going to, a lot of folks make plans for the 4th of July. If you're going to have to leave them at home, even then leave them in a secured room in your home, as soundproof as you can get. Maybe a television playing or some music playing to sort of drown out that noise, because even indoors, your pets can get excited and get anxious and cause damage to your home or to themselves. And that's the last thing we want to know, is that somebody didn't take the proper steps and their animal injured themselves or damaged something in the home. So always want to preach precaution. Take the steps that are necessary to protect your animal.
Well, let's take this time to make sure that everyone knows in the Tehachapi area, the greater Tehachapi area, all mountain communities in Kern County, 0 fireworks.
Yes.
The safe and sanes are illegal. There are no fireworks that are allowed. There will be a fireworks show in the city of Tehachapi,
which dogs will still have an adverse reaction to. Yes,
but know that that'll start at 9 p.m. So if you we'll tell you that right now. So 9 p.m. on the 4th of July, that'll be the kickoff to our fireworks spectacular.
Yes, yeah, and it's a big one. It's going to be a big one. It was the last few years. Every year we try to make it a little bit better, and this year it's going to be a big one. So be prepared, just with your dogs, because a lot of those things, the echoes around here too. Some of those shells go off at the airport and they echo through the entire valley. Yes. They're so big. So,
and one of the things I've seen, Corey, in my time here is these dogs, they're so hypersensitive when this goes off, and they end up running out in front of a car because they're really not paying attention to anything but just flee.
Get away. Yeah.
And that's sad to see. As an officer, you see this dog trying to get away, and then somebody's not paying attention and runs it over. So please consider your dogs with your celebration is what I would stress from the police department.
And then Nick, so if you've got a stray, you guys use some digital marketing. You take photos of animals that are in custody,
in jail,
that you have. So people might not have to make the trip down to Fruitvale to go look at who you have, in the cages. Or is cages the correct word?
Yeah, I mean,
okay, yeah. It is what it is. Okay, but you guys take photos and you put them up so people can go through. So there's no reason, if your animal you get home and it's not there, that you shouldn't go online. And where should we send them?
Yeah, that's a good point, Key. We do a number of different things to try and let the community know that if they're missing an animal, these are the animals that are in our facility. First and foremost, KernCountyAnimalServices.org. Go right to our website. There's a link that says I lost my pet, and you can literally look at a picture of every animal in our facility. If it just came in, it's usually about a 2-hour delay between the time that the animal comes in and the time that there's a picture posted.
That's pretty fast.
Absolutely. And then, of course, our social media is super important to follow. We've made this concerted effort recently with the influx of animals coming into our facility and the lack of folks coming for them to try to get the message out on social media about the animals that have just come in. So we're posting some live videos of animals that just came in. We're posting some reports about animals that just come in the last few days. We're doing everything we can to let the community know if you lost your animal, check the website, and here's some photos of animals that just came in the last few days. And by all means, if you see your animal, come down. Come down as soon as we're open. We'll work with you. We'll make sure that you leave with your pet. Like Chief said, a lot of times when the animals get out, they may get injured or hurt in some way. And God forbid that happens, we do make sure that there's emergency veterinary care provided. So if your animal does get out, just make sure that you reach out to the animal shelter and check the website, check social media. If your animal's there, come down and ask us. And we'll do everything we can to get them back to you.
Great. I want to ask you about one more program, and that is your Pets for Vets.
Yes.
So let's talk about that and highlight that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. There's a bit of a story here. Actually, the state of California passed a law 2 years ago that requires animal shelters, public animal shelters, to offer free adoptions to veterans. However, the county has been doing free adoptions for veterans for about 7 years. There was a wonderful organization called Animals for Armed Forces that used to sponsor adoptions at particular times of the year, and great organization. They would pay the adoption fees for veterans, and then we just at some point decided, well, it's such a good connection to place a shelter pet with a veteran, and we just thought, well, let's do that year round. So we've been doing that for about 7 years. Either a veteran of the armed services or a direct family member of a veteran can come to the county animal shelter, and there's no fee to adopt any of the animals in our facility for veterans.
Very nice.
Awesome.
Now, Nick, is there anything we haven't touched on, asked you, or programs that you have coming up that you want to share with the community?
I think that probably the most important thing is, we're dealing with a pretty significant lack of availability for veterinary care, especially spay and neuter. Spay and neuter is the solution to a lot of the ailments that face Kern County as far as animals. And we know that it's tough to come by spay and neuter. County has a pretty strong, viable program to provide low-cost, efficient spay and neuter. Our appointments fill up really fast. We try to get out to the outlying areas as often as we can, but follow our son on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. I'm not a social media guy, but a guy that works for me does thankfully. But we're on all the social media channels, and all of that information, especially for spay and neuter, is put up right as those opportunities are available. And we just ask the community to take advantage of those resources to fix your pet, so that you're doing your part to make sure that those animals don't end up at a shelter at some point down the road.
Perfect. Cool. Guys, anything in closing?
I'm good.
Nailed it.
All right, good. So I know Jason and Nick are going to have another conversation offline. So Nick, want to say thank you again for taking the time coming up, leaving Bakersfield, coming up here to Tehachapi to have this face-to-face conversation. I know the community is going to appreciate this. So just thank you.
Sure. And by all means, if there are follow-up questions, I'm happy to come back.
And if you do have a follow-up question, we'll invite Nick back. We'll also make sure we get them to Nick. You can send them to media@TehachapiCityHall.com. We appreciate the time that you spend with us here at Tehachapod. And today's show was based on a question from the community, from our listening audience. So that's what drove this to reach out to Nick. So we do listen to your suggestions. Send them to media@TehachapiCityHall.com. And we'll catch you again soon right here on Tehachapod.
Tehachapod is a conversation about Tehachapi, featuring the community members who make this such a special place to call home. If you have a question or a thought you'd like to share, email media@TehachapiCityHall.com. Thank you to Gary Mazzola for sharing his song, This is Tehachapi.